everybody, welcome to Chess Harbor. My name is Raf, and today I want to continue with the Road to Master series. Today marks the first game of the Zilveren Toren, or the Silver Rook if you want, tournament from 2026. It was played last week. We had to play against the team from Borgerhout in Antwerp, which is a very strong team and actually houses one of the or a couple of the best young players in Belgium. And my opponent here was another example of that, also a very young player, but definitely a strong opponent. And he started the game with the move e4. And for some of you who've been watching my content recently, know that I've been favoring the Modern Scandinavian to avoid some main lines, which is again what I chose to play here, as playing into the main lines felt very risky against a young player like that, because usually you just get outclassed with some kind of novelty or just more knowledge of the position. So I decided to play the Scandinavian again. My opponent takes the pawn on d5 and I play knight to f6. And here my opponent plays probably the best move, which is the move d4. I take the pawn and now the move c4. So white gets the entire center here, which is probably white's best way of playing. Knight to b6 here, and white has a very menacing center. Currently we can't really do anything about that. But my opponent plays somewhat of an inaccuracy, and I want to explain that further by saying that white's best move is the move knight to f3. The reason behind this is that it makes sure that black can't play the move e5, and you'll see why that could be an issue. And in this position, black's best approach is to play the move g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, and you're gonna play against white's center with some kind of modern style pressurizing with pieces, and then going for e5 or c5 at some point, trying to undermine the center. That's the main idea behind the move knight to f3. It stops black from easily achieving the move e5. And after my opponent's move, which is knight to c3, it actually allows the move e5, which is a pawn sacrifice, but I know it's the main theory here, as it is the best move. Knight to e5 or pawn to e5 is the best move, and according to the engine, white's best move is actually knight to f3, just inviting white to do something here. Going for bishop to g4 is the best. And the position gets very tricky, but the most common played move is either d5, which is not so good because now you have a very good path for your bishop with these weak dark squares, and the pawn on e5 is actually strong, so black has a very fine position in this one. And if you take the pawn, which is what my opponent played, is the most obvious move as well, black should actually be a little bit better, or at least equal in this position. I knew that from theory point of view, but of course you still have to prove that your pawn sacrifice is actually good. So we start by taking the queens off. Knight takes on d1 is probably best, which my opponent played. And now knight to c6. We're developing with tempo against the e5 pawn. White's best idea is to hold on to it with f4. And now black has a choice of putting the bishop on f5 or on e6. The move e6 is a little bit more logical because you also hit the c4 pawn now, so you have to do something against that as well. Move b3, for example, can be played, but then you can see black has 3 developed pieces and white has 0 developed pieces, which gives ample compensation for the sacrificed pawn. My opponent here played the move knight to e3, which at least kind of develops a piece again. It defends the c4 pawn, but now we long castle, and again you can see three developed minor pieces. A rook on the open file is more than enough compensation for black in this position for the sacrificed pawn. And again, I knew that from a theory point of view, but now you need to prove your compensation, and my opponent plays very well from this point. He plays knight to f3, which is the best move, just developing, getting ready to castle as quickly as possible. Currently this bishop doesn't really have a good spot to develop because of this knight as well. So I play bishop to c5, setting up some kind of tricks maybe along the way. And now my opponent plays not the best move, but actually a very annoying move. He plays knight to g5. Going after my bishop, I can't just go something like rook here, because then the pawn here would hang at some point. Rook to e8 would actually be a fine move as well. At least it keeps my, if he decides to take on the h file, at least I can try to keep my bishop here. So there is some kind of awkward tension there. So after knight to g5, I decided to go for knight to b4, which is a very good try for black. Trying to set up some kind of fork after taking on e3, and my opponent parried it very well. He parried it with the move a3, and now there is only one good line for black, and here I actually calculated as deeply as I could. I probably spent 15 to 20 minutes in this position, thinking about what to do. I thought about taking on e3, and if bishop takes, it's no good, because then I have a nice fork. If the king defends the bishop, then the rook drops. So this position is great for black. So after bishop takes on e3, there is only one move that can be played, and that is the move a takes on b4. And I thought so long about this position, I couldn't see the continuation. I spent lots of minutes wasting on my clock to calculate how I can still have my compensation and not be down a pawn. And after bishop takes on c1, rook takes on c1, I finally came up with the move rook to d4, which is also the engine's suggestion, but actually a losing move, as white has a +0 or +1.5 lead in this position, as currently the pawns are all defendable. After knight takes pawn, or if not knight takes e6, pawn takes e6, g3, white is actually stable as a rock. The bishop has a very annoying square to come to, hitting the backwards pawn, which is also with check, which makes it even worse. And the rook is actually not currently threatening anything. The rook is still out of the game. So this is how the game continued. And it's also, I spent so much time on this position, and I thought with rook to d4 that I had enough compensation, because I couldn't calculate far enough. I was thinking what to do in this position. I had calculated up to this point, and here I was thinking king to d7, king to e7, something like that, rook to d8, but then the king would block and this pawn would fall. So I already felt like I screwed up somewhere along the way. The other position I spent so much time thinking in is after a6 here. I spent a lot of time thinking about either bishop takes on e3 with the idea with the knight there, which would be winning, or with the line I just showed you. On the other line I calculated was knight to d3 check, and I couldn't see the winning continuation here. I thought bishop takes on e3, rook takes on d3. I don't have enough compensation. After king e2, rook to b3 is what I thought, and now I just couldn't see what I could still do. After knight takes on e6, f takes on e6, it just didn't look clear to me where my compensation was still, because I'm still a pawn down, and what compensation do I have? And actually the compensation here is still available. The threat is rook takes knight, bishop takes knight, rook takes on b2 check. But sadly, my brain just didn't have the capacity to calculate that far. With the multiple threats of taking back the pawn on c4 and taking the b2 pawn, my brain just couldn't comprehend this amount of depth in the position, which is unfortunate, because I did definitely look at this line, and it was the best line. But in the end, as I said, about 15 to 20 minutes further, I decided to go for bishop takes on e3. Bishop takes on e3 wasn't played, because that would be a losing mistake. As I mentioned, bishop takes on e3 allows this kind of check, and black would be winning. So my opponent immediately takes back on b4. And now, what do you do? There is really only one move available, and that's bishop takes on c1. Otherwise, the pawn on a7 would also fall. So bishop takes on c1, rook takes on c1, and as I had calculated, I thought with rook to d4 I still held some compensation because of the activity of the pieces. But of course, I knew that because of this knight to g5, there was always going to be some annoying trouble on on e6. So he took off the bishop, f takes on e6, and g3. So the line I had shown earlier, where we had reached this exact line I had calculated up to this point. And here, yeah, I already definitely felt a little bit worse because this pawn is not going to be taken. Currently, it's very solid, and the bishop coming out on h3 is looking hell of annoying. And here I spent about another 15 to 20 minutes thinking about what I should do. I definitely felt like I was already losing, and it's the engine agrees with that. And I was thinking about rook to d8, trying to maybe double up on the 7th and then getting some kind of perpetual. That would be my best option. But at any point where that's happened, the king could maybe just step out of the way, or after rook to d8, just the bishop to h3. It's never going to be able to get a perpetual then. And this pawn is always going to drop, so that didn't feel good. And then I came up with some more creative defense. I eventually played the move pawn to g5, which the engine agrees is the best move in a losing position, as it is at least somewhat tricky. I'm undermining the big pawn chain here. And white's best option is, of course, to take. The compensation is ample. These kingside pawns are way too strong, and even the queenside pawns are way too strong because they're very solid. And here, knight to d7, I thought about this, taking back with the knight, because really this is a problem piece. The piece is not doing anything with these two pawns here, and I should migrate the piece towards the king side, where it can at least do something. And I thought about that move for a long time, but I thought at least keeping some pressure on c4 might be good. And eventually I decided on rook to e4 check, bishop to e2, and rook takes on e5. But again, knight to d7 was more tenacious here. So after the mistake here with bishop takes on e3 instead of knight to d3 check, yeah, everything is going more and more downhill. I'm trying to be a little bit more creative in my defense, but white is playing an excellent game here. So rook e4 check, bishop e2, rook takes on e5, and now just a very solid h4. These kingside pawns are menacing, and they're going to roll down the board at any point in the game. White has a very strong open f-file that they can occupy and infiltrate on the 7th rank, and at some point taking control over the d file here might also be good. So I played rook to d8. Again, maybe more tenacious was king to d7 with the idea of king e7, at least holding on to this one. I was still hoping at some point maybe my rook coming in here with the pin on the bishop, that my rook can maybe come to either d4 or d3 and start harassing some of the pawns, and maybe in some ideal world where my opponent makes multiple mistakes in a row, I still have enough activity to hold a draw here. But winning is really out of the question at this point. My opponent played very solid rook f1, looking to just get into the position. Either f6 or f7 look absolutely glorious. And I played knight to a4, again, somewhat of a tricky move. What should I do otherwise? I'm trying to get in here, and then maybe get in here with some kind of a fork against the rook and queen, rook and king, so that I can maybe pick up some kind of material and hope for some kind of compensation. But it doesn't work. Rook to c2, very solid. The knight's not going anywhere. Best move might just be to go back. I play pawn to c5. It doesn't really make a difference. But the idea being that if he now takes, I again have this threat. But after rook d2, even the threat is not there anymore. So knight to e4, for example, rook d8, king takes on d8. My king is at least closer on to defending the king side, and we definitely still have a game here, as the knight is a little bit of a tricky piece. But I'm still going to be losing because these pawns are way too solid. But this would have maybe been a more tenacious try as well. again, if it's possible, but my opponent didn't even allow this. My opponent played the very good move b3, a very nice intermediate move, which now kicks the knight away of the defense of c5. So I play knight to b6 again. Pawn takes on c5. I was thinking knight to d7 here, because maybe if I have knight to d7, I can still take back and get the same thing. But after b4, yeah, position is hopeless. These pawns are just as menacing as these ones. So what do I do now? Sacrifice another pawn with a5? I definitely thought about it. But then b takes on a5, knight takes on c5, then these two pawns are still somewhat menacing. And maybe there is some pressure on b7 in the long run with the bishop coming to f3. So that's also really bad. So that didn't look really appealing. So after c takes, or after b takes on c5, I played rook takes on c5, and now rook to d2. Trading off a pair of rooks here immediately should win white the game. So I decline. Rook to g8, and now bishop to g4. Finally hitting that weak pawn. It's threatening a lot of nasty things with this fork. I had calculated a tricky line here, knight to d7, with the idea that maybe my knight could come in on some kind of squares here, which would be a little bit annoying, but rook to f7, very strong. And now knight to e5 with a fork, but it still works out in white's favor. Bishop takes on e6. Rook, the king has to go to b8 because the other squares are not available. And now very solid move again, rook e7, just attacking the rook but keeping the rook active on the 7th. I was even maybe thinking that in this position rook takes on b7 is an absolute lights out move. King takes, bishop takes is also just completely lights out, because this pawn is going to drop and white is ahead a ton of material. That looked even more forcing to me. That's what I would have played. But rook to e7, yeah, nothing can go wrong with that move either. So I had to go into the pit. I played knight f3 check, but my opponent had calculated that it turns to nothing. King to d1, knight takes, king takes, and here, or sorry, I actually he flicked in. So knight takes on d2. He flicked in bishop takes on g8 first. And then knight takes on b3, bishop takes on h7, and I took on c4. I thought about playing a couple more moves. It definitely can't hurt, but I know I'm completely losing here. Pawn to g6, rook to g4, pawn to g7. I took on g3. He makes a new queen. I have to take it, of course. And in this position, I know I'm completely losing. I'll try one more move. But after bishop to d5, even my pawns on the queen side are going to drop. My knight is not going to be in time to stop this pawn either, and I had to resign. So my opponent played a fantastic game here. Yeah, very strong opponent. I definitely know that I had a good position after the move e5 here. After d takes on e5, we just look at a couple more moves here. Yeah, you can see that the compensation from black was ample. 3 minor pieces well developed with pressure against center, a rook on the open file, and a bishop that can come out. The position should be good for black, but I just misplayed it. That's yeah, this knight to d3 idea that I definitely did see but didn't play was definitely a huge blunder. So well played from my opponent. Very nice game. Another one that I learned a lot from, especially in this modern Scandinavian idea, playing with the compensation. So definitely not a wasted definitely not a wasted experience, but something to learn from for sure. I hope I can pick up my slack from this one in the next round of the Zilveren Toren. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys for the next one.